Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. In today's show, I want to discuss what you should do once you realize that your child's dream of earning a full-ride Division I athletic scholarship to college is over. A dream that, for many student athletes and their parents, has probably been brewing for about 10 years, if not more, before you realize that it's not going to happen. If you've been following any local sports outlets these days, you've probably seen images of local high school student athletes who are participating in National Letter of Intent Signing Day, where they formally sign a letter committing to play their particular sport at a particular college. They're often referred to as commits. She's a Brown commit for water polo, or he's a Tufts commit for lacrosse, or he's a Stanford commit for swimming, whatever it might be. This is a great day to behold for these student athletes. They have worked tirelessly for years and years and years to put themselves in a position to play at the next level, and they should revel in all the attention and recognition that they're getting. For many, if not all, this is a dream come true, and they deserve it. But what about the 99% of student athletes who wanted to be or assumed they would be college-bound athletes? But they're not participating in signing day. They're not moving on with sports in college. What are they thinking? Many of them are friends and teammates of these commits. They played side by side with them for the last 4, 5, 6, 10 years, but for one reason or another, they didn't make it. When did it dawn on them that their dream wasn't going to come true? And how are they dealing with it? Was it a surprise that it was not them who was sitting behind the dais signing the commitment letter, or had they figured this out a few years ago? And while that exploration of the psyche of the student athlete who didn't quite make it would be fascinating, I'm going to leave that exploration for another episode. Because today, I'd like to focus on the parents. And the question that I'd like to address is, at what point does mom or dad realize that their child will not have what it takes to get that proverbial full-ride athletic scholarship to college? Is it 6th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade? And of course, the premise here is that their child and they had it in their minds, or maybe were very explicit about it from early on, that their child would be one of the few to pull off this rare feat, that their child was different and uniquely talented, and surely would be one of the few to achieve this level of success. At what point did they realize this? And at what point did they admit to themselves and ultimately say it out loud? At what point did they bring up this realization with their child, if at all? When they came upon this realization, what did they do? Did they try to redirect their child into a different sport? Did they do nothing and just let things play out? Did they subtly try to steer them into a new activity? Did they double down on the sport and push even harder? What should a parent do? And when should they do it? When is it premature to suggest pulling the plug on the idea? What are the unintended consequences of that? Is there time to recover? That's a lot of ground to cover, and I'd like to get through as much of it as I can. But before we jump in, I want to make sure I cover a few caveats. The points I will discuss today are generalizations. There will likely be exceptions to every example. There are differences in how scholarships work, based on gender and sport and part of the country and policies at different colleges For example, if I suggest that female athletes typically have a longer window of time compared to males before it becomes clear whether or not they have the potential to play sports in college, that's a generalization. There are exceptions to that rule. I know a female ice hockey player who, quote, committed to Colgate in 8th grade. I know several female volleyball players who, quote, committed to UCLA and Berkeley as 8th and 9th graders. So if I suggest that some female athletes can wait until junior year before it becomes clear whether or not they're viable college athletes, I'm generalizing. You'll have to figure out where your daughter and her particular sport fits into the mix. Similarly, if I suggest that most equivalency sports, quote unquote, such as lacrosse or baseball or softball, do not offer, quote, full ride scholarships, and instead may offer partial scholarships or no scholarships at all, that this is not a hard and fast rule. There are exceptions to this rule. I'm sure you could find an example of a student who has received the equivalent of a full ride athletic scholarship to a college for a sport that technically doesn't offer full ride scholarships to all of the athletes on the team. Those cases are rare, but they exist. So my suggestion is not to get fixated on trying to find the exceptions to these general rules, but instead use them as guideposts to assess where your son or daughter might fit in. Scenario 1. When should you know, as a parent, whether or not your child has a shot at some kind of scholarship to college for sports? In my experience, the answer is sophomore year for boys and junior year for girls. Again, it depends on the sport. But generally speaking, especially for head count sports, these are sports that actually offer full ride athletic scholarships. Sophomore year for boys and junior year for girls is when it should become very clear that your child is either on the path or not on the path. As a parent, depending on how tuned in you are to where your child stacks up nationally, you may have no idea how realistic this is. As far as you know, your child is a great athlete, and the scholarship offers are forthcoming. After all, they've been playing sports their whole life. They've always been on one of the best teams. They play on one of the most elite club teams. They make the all-star team every year. You spent every weekend for the last 6 years going to tournaments and clinics and camps. You spent tens of thousands of dollars on team dues and equipment and travel and food and hotels. They made the varsity team as a freshman and a sophomore. How could they not be on the scholarship path? They've checked all the boxes, haven't they? Well, that's the rub. There are hundreds of thousands of high school athletes who have also checked off the boxes, and not nearly as many spots on Division I teams, let alone scholarship teams. So if you're a parent and you have a child who has it in their head that they're going to use sports to help them get into college, either as a scholarship athlete as a Division I school, or a non-scholarship athlete at an Ivy League school, which are also Division I, or as a non-scholarship athlete at a Division III school, you should be able to assess whether this is realistic or not by the beginning of sophomore year for boys or the beginning of junior year for girls. So what does this mean? It means if you have a child who fits this mold, you should take a hard and dispassionate look at where they really stand. Are they viable college prospects in their sport? If so, at what level? Division I, Division II, Division III? And don't get me wrong, this may not be abundantly clear at the outset. Even if you have a suspicion, it may take some work to figure this out. And I can talk about how you might make this assessment, but it would take a long time, and we don't have time for that right now, maybe in a follow-on episode. But at some point, you need to make this assessment. Is this going to be a thing that is using sports to help your child get into college or not? And coming to grips with this, if the answer is no, will not be easy. You know as well as I know, there's a lot of investment here on your part and on the part of your child, mentally, physically, emotionally, socially. Chances are that if your child has focused almost exclusively on sports for the last 8 or 10 years, and it's become part of their identity, with the goal of getting that elusive college scholarship, it will not be easy for them, or for you for that matter, to turn away from it. However, if they don't and you don't address this issue, an even tougher road may lie ahead. So let's break it down. Let's say you take my advice, you hit the pause button in sophomore or junior year, and you really assess what path your child is on as it relates to sports. You should come up with one of 3 options. 1, are they on the path for Division I? 2, are they on the path for Division III? And option 3, do they have no college sports prospects? So let's go through each one. Start with Division I. If your objective, realistic assessment in the beginning of sophomore year for boys and junior year for girls is that your child is one of the few, the very few, who will make it to the Division I level on full scholarship or partial scholarship, or to one of the Ivy League schools that are Division I but don't offer athletic scholarships, then your path is clear. Your job, and by your, I mean you and your child, your job is to begin an all-out marketing campaign to college coaches to ensure that your child gets the exposure they need to fulfill this goal. And of course, I don't have time to go through each of these steps right now. Hopefully, you're enrolled in PrepWell Academy's athlete program, where I go through each of these steps in detail at exactly the right time. And if you're not yet enrolled, and you have a 9th or a 10th grader who's on the cusp of being a scholarship athlete, I urge you to sign up and get moving. Because, as you see, the window is closing quickly and you have to act. Let's move on to Division III. Now, you might wonder, if you're listening closely, why I skipped Division II. Well, I skipped Division II as an option because parents have this notion, I believe it's a false notion, that there are tons of Division II schools out there that are ready to take all of the players that didn't quite make it at the Division I level. This is simply not the case. For one, there are not that many Division II schools. I believe it's on the order of maybe 280 schools or so. And secondly, I have found that parents and their children are sometimes disappointed that they don't recognize a lot of the colleges on that Division II list. Schools like Caldwell University, Drury University, Lane College. Not that there's anything wrong with these schools, but many are just not as recognizable as many Division I or Division III schools. So for these reasons, I've chosen to skip Division II schools for our purposes. There are plenty of opportunities at Division II schools, don't get me wrong, but they're just less well known. And instead, we'll stick with Division III schools. Schools like Amherst and Tufts and Wesleyan, which, as many of us know, do not offer athletic scholarships in any way, but do represent some of the more academically rigorous and selective colleges in the country. So if your child is a great athlete, but not tracking to be the type of athlete to make it to the Division I level, scholarship or no scholarship, using their athletic ability might be their ticket, so to speak, to getting into a highly competitive Division III school that they otherwise would have very little chance of getting into without sports. Of course, the kicker here is that there will be no athletic scholarship at these schools, but that's a whole different story. All of that hard work on the basketball court or the swimming pool or the track may not translate into dollars or financial aid, but it may give them a chance to get into a highly regarded college, and maybe that's reward enough. And by the way, these days, getting the attention of a Division III coach is almost as hard as it is with a Division I coach. Student athletes across the country who don't make it to the Division I level are all scrambling for Division III opportunities. So the competition is fierce. It's not as if your child is going to have their pick of Division III schools, even if they do have Division I potential. but they decide to opt for Division III. Au contraire, they will have to go through the very same full-time marketing and outreach campaign as they would have to do with Division I coaches. And if you need help with that, please enroll, if you aren't yet, in PrepWell Academy's athlete program, where I walk you through how to email coaches, what to write, when to write, how to create compelling highlight films, and so on. Okay, we've talked about Division I, Division II, and Division III schools. Now let's go to our final category. No college sports at all. What happens if your child, though very good at sports, and they've played their whole life, and they couldn't imagine themselves not playing sports, maybe even in college, just doesn't appear to be tracking even at the Division III level? And by the way, this is extremely common. Division III sports today are extremely competitive. Don't fall asleep on Division III. It's not something that you just roll into whenever you want. Like most worthwhile things, it takes time, effort, and pursuit. And if your child doesn't appear to have the requisite skills, the body type, or the attitude to push themselves to reach this goal, then it's probably a good time to establish that playing sports in college is no longer the priority it once was. Again, this can come as a very rude awakening to a 15 or a 16-year-old who has had visions of Division I sports in their head since age 7 or 8, and who identifies as an athlete and who hangs out with athletes. So don't convince yourself that this is going to be an easy thing to bring up with your child. It probably will not be. But if they had the maturity to recognize that sports was not turning out the way they had planned for any number of reasons, and that the time and the effort to make it to the next level was not worth it for whatever reason, where does that leave them now? Here are a few options. Option number 1, they stick with the status quo and continue living with the false hope that they will someday become good enough to play their sport in college. I can typically pick out those students immediately when I hear their answer to one simple question. I ask them, do you want to play sports in college? And their answer is almost always something along the lines of, yeah, I guess I would if I get recruited. This is the telltale sign that the student has no intention of putting in the work that it will take to play college sports. They think that there will be some day in the future where college coaches will start to randomly call them and recruit them with no additional effort on their part. It will just happen. This scenario is very, very rare. So if they stick with the status quo and continue to focus exclusively on sports, but without doing what it would take to get to the next level, and by doing this, they crowd out participating in any other activities, then they risk significantly hampering their competitiveness when it comes to college admissions. And I know that was a mouthful, so I'm going to repeat that. This is important. If they stick with the status quo and continue to focus exclusively on their sport, but without doing what it would take to get to that next level, and by doing this, they crowd out participating in any other activities, then they risk significantly hampering their competitiveness when it comes to college admissions. Well, why is that the case? Because when it comes time to apply to colleges, they won't have much to show for themselves, other than the fact that they were a strong high school athlete who couldn't quite make the leap to college. That doesn't make them a bad person. It just doesn't make them particularly interesting or compelling. Because remember, there are other students out there, non-athletes, who are doing all kinds of extracurricular activities, things that your child never had time to do because they were so busy playing their sport. They put all of their eggs in the athlete basket, but the athlete basket didn't pay off, so to speak. And now they appear very one-dimensional to admissions officers. In my admissions counseling practice, I can see this student profile a mile away. So my advice would be to be careful about sticking with the status quo if getting recruited to play sports in college appears to be a bridge too far, especially if your child expects to be competitive in the college admissions process down the road. And finally, option number 2, they can mix things up. In this scenario, your child can continue playing their sport, continue enjoying the experience of high school athletics and the team bonding and competition. In other words, they don't have to quit their sport, but at the same time, they have to open their minds to other opportunities that they've backed away from in the past due to their allegiance to their sport. They have to look around, figure out what else is out there, see what excites them. Maybe it's speech and debate, or maybe they want to get involved in student government, or start their own business, or go deep into academics. It doesn't really matter what. What matters is that they are taking off the blinders, the sports blinders, and participating in other parts of the high school experience. This could be very healthy for them. It gives them opportunities to explore things that will likely inform their decisions about where to go to college, what to major in, what industry they might like. If they kept those sports blinders on, they might not ever engage with these questions. Now, don't get me wrong. Coming to grips with something like this will not happen overnight. Stepping off the treadmill of 24/7 sports is not easy. There's going to be a transition period, and you have to use your best ninja parenting skills to convey these concepts with honesty and compassion and understanding. I have had many parents who've hired me to help coach their child through this transition by laying out the roadmap and the pros and the cons. And even with the best counseling strategies, there will likely be days of confusion and self-doubt, maybe even a little panic. That's okay. Better to have these feelings now as a sophomore or junior than in September of their senior year when they're applying to colleges and have no idea who they are or what they're interested, not to mention a very lightweight application. I'd rather get through this realization earlier rather than later. Obviously, this type of early intervention is the hallmark of PrepWell Academy, where I try to give students and parents information early enough for it to matter. So if you're not yet enrolled in PrepWell Academy, and you think it might help your child and you face down some of these important challenges and questions, and give you the tactics and the strategies to address them, please enroll today. Remember, we only allow freshmen and sophomores to enroll for this very reason. We need to make sure that you are in the know on all of this important information when it matters most, freshman and sophomore year. Beginning this process in junior or senior year, if you want to be a very competitive candidate, is simply too late. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. If you know a parent with an 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, or 11th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share this episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box with a tiny arrow pointing up. That's the share button. Click that button, text your friends this link, put a little personal note in there from you asking, recommending that they give it a listen. And of course, if you have questions, comments, or an idea for an upcoming episode, please reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram, visit our blog, check us out on Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. And until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.